Welcome back to Biblical Musings on the book of Joshua. I hope you're looking forward to our study. If you have been following with us and you have been reading along, we're going to kind of move very quickly through the next 10 chapters or so. This central portion of the book of Joshua is not unimportant by any stretch of the imagination, but it is somewhat tedious, and for the purposes of our study, we're going to kind of do an overview of this central portion today. So I'd encourage you to read it in its entirety at least once, and to make some notes if you find things of interest. I've marked some things of interest for our purpose as well, and those are kind of the things we're going to focus on as we study together. So without further ado, I invite you to open your Bible to Joshua chapter 10, and let's pick up where we left off with the battle of the five kings. In our last study, we saw how God gave Joshua a great victory. How Joshua, with the Lord's miraculous aid, defeated these five kings who were attacking their new ally, Gibeon. And how they completely defeated them through a miraculous victory. If you didn't catch that video, I'd encourage you to go back in there, catch back up. But today, we look at how the conquest of basically the rest of the land talked about in the book of Joshua takes place. And the book itself, the book of Joshua, begins to speed up at this point and begins to mention much more in passing how many battles and even several years take place through this great war that's going on for the conquest of Canaan. We also see Joshua begin to sort of pass the mantle to other men. And that's an important thing we'll see in this first chapter we're studying together, chapter 10. So here in chapter 10, after the five kings have been defeated, there's a great rout. And Joshua and his army begin chasing the routed foes all over the land. The five kings hide in a cave. The sons of Israel rock up the cave with some large boulders and continue into pursuit and come back later and release the five kings to do punishment upon them. It's at this time, Joshua says this in verse 22. Then Joshua said, "Open the mouth of the cave and bring those five kings out to me from the cave." And they did so. And they brought these five kings out to him from the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And when they brought these kings out to Joshua, Joshua called for all the men of Israel and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with him, "Come near and put your feet on the necks of these kings." And so they came near and put their feet on their necks. And Joshua said to them, "Do not fear or be dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies with whom you will fight." So Joshua displays to those men whom he's been leading, those leaders of the fighting men, he says to them, "Come near and show your dominance over these kings. These kings who were so mighty and so powerful and who came here to destroy us, God has completely defeated them with your hands. You have been his instruments," in other words. And so he's showing them, illustrating to them in very real ways how the Lord is fighting for them, with them, and using them. And he says, "Be strong and courageous." He echoes what was said to him by God and even other men, all for the first chapter of our book and even before, if you remember our earlier studies. And so Joshua is beginning to pass on to others the lessons they will need to learn, because Joshua is not getting any younger. In fact, he's getting quite old. And he won't be around forever. Even in this conquest, this greater war, other men are going to need to step up and take leadership. And I think this is the beginning where we see that. So the five kings are slain, and then the rest of the chapter describes how Joshua and the armies take the cities of those five kings as well as some other lands, and then they return to their camp. In chapter 11, northern Palestine, most of the north is taken. Since the south has kind of been taken, now they move on to the north. It's a list of many kings and battles that come together at the beginning, it's another coalition of great many kings and cities come to fight, and they're all defeated rather quickly by Joshua. And then one by one, their cities are taken. Many, many cities. This takes quite some time, it says. And so, through a long period of time, Joshua begins to take the land from the evil Canaanites and deliver it into the hands of Israel. At the end of this chapter, we have the key verse. Before we get to that, in verse 13, there's another interesting thing. It says, however, Israel did not burn any cities that stood on their mounds except Hazor alone. So even though they're taking many cities, they destroyed Jericho, they destroyed Ai. The Lord commands them here in this chapter to stop destroying cities except this one other one, Hazor, and to begin leaving them so they'll have a place to live. Because if they destroy everything, the land will be barren. And so they begin to leave a lot of the land intact so that they'll have homes to live in and things of that nature. Also, at the end of this chapter, we see Joshua begin to divide up the land among the people because it's getting to that time. They've taken enough territory. They've fought many, many long battles, and it's getting to that time. Chapter 12 is really a list of the kings that have been defeated so far. That's a list of 31 kings. You can imagine the size and the scope of this campaign. It's quite beyond our comprehension almost. It's such a massive campaign. It's taken place over a long time. God has continually delivered Israel through every battle. He's fought for them in every siege. And the only ones they have lost, being one of the battles of Ai and the other few little issues they've had along the way, has been when Israel has deserted and rebelled against God. But when they stay faithful, when they stay strong and courageous, when they obey the commands, when they show faith in God and trust in Him, He leads them to victory after victory after victory. Moving into chapter 13, verse 1 says, Joshua was old and advanced in years when the Lord said to him, you are old and advanced in years, and very much the land remains to be possessed. So he says there's still more to do, but you're getting old, Joshua. How would that make you feel if God said, you know what, you're getting old? Maybe we don't like to hear that, but we shouldn't be ashamed of getting old. For Joshua, he can look back over many, many years of faithful service. Many things accomplished, and he looks forward to many things yet to be done. And so the Lord reminds him, your time is finite, but I have given you a large task to complete as the leader of this people. You need to begin to plan for the future when you're gone. You need to start dealing with those things, if you will. And so he begins to divide up the land among all the people and among the leaders. It's not just him. The high priest is also in there, and the chiefs of the people. And so the Lord tells Joshua to begin to let others show leadership, to begin to let others inhabit the land. And from this point on, we'll see others lead battles where Joshua does not participate in some cases. And so that's interesting as well. So the rest of this chapter talks about how the land that Moses gave to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh across the Jordan, how the tribe of Levi did not receive any possessions in it. And there's kind of a list of what those three tribes on the eastern side of the Jordan received. And that finishes out chapter 13. So we're about to get into a in-depth description of the bounds and the cities and the territories going to be given to each tribe as Joshua and the leaders of Israel give them. But right here, almost in the middle, before that happens, we have a really interesting story. We haven't talked a lot about Caleb, but he's the only other man who was alive to see Egypt. Think about that. He's the only other man who is alive to see Egypt. He was one of the 12 spies along with Joshua. They were the two faithful spies who spied out the land under Moses many, many years before. And they have stayed faithful all these years. And because of that, the Lord made a promise to Caleb. And so Caleb reminds Joshua of it. Begin in verse 6 of chapter 14. It says, Then the sons of Judah drew near to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, You know the word which the Lord spoke to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought word back to him as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt with fear. But I followed the Lord my God fully. So Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot has trodden will be an inheritance to you and to your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God fully. Now behold, the Lord has let me live, just as he spoke, these 45 years, from the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses when Israel walked in the wilderness. And now behold, I am 85 years old today. I am still as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now, for war and for going out and coming in. Now then, give me this hill country, about which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day that Anakim was there, with great fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord has spoken. So Caleb comes to Joshua, these two oldest, seasoned veteran men who walked with Moses in the wilderness, who spied out the land in their youth, or sort of in their youth, in their middle age, I guess you could say, since they were both around 40 years old when they did so. And now Caleb comes to Joshua and says, I'm 85 years old, but I am still as strong and robust as the day I spied out the land 45 years ago. I want this hill country right here, where these fortified cities are, where the Anakim live. These are these mighty, mighty warriors. These, the ones of whom they said before that they're like giants and we're grasshoppers in their eyes and in our own eyes when we look at them. Caleb says, those are the people I want you to send me against, Joshua. That's where I want to make my home. If the Lord will be with me, maybe he'll be with me and I can drive them out. These giant, mighty men, these fierce warriors. That's where I want my possession. The Lord said, where I trod my foot so many years before I could claim as my possession. That's what I want. I want the most difficult. I want the most difficult place in the whole promised land as my own possession. So we have this 85-year-old man who says, out of all this land we've conquered, out of all these battles we've won, all these glorious, beautiful places we've gone, I don't want something that's already been taken. No. I want the most difficult, rugged mountain country full of mean, mighty warriors as my possession. If the Lord's with me, I'll drive them out and make the land safe and claim it as my inheritance for my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Can you see the faith of this man, this seasoned warrior who's followed God his whole life, who's been faithful his whole life? I hope that his faith impresses you, as it always does me when I read this story. It's just his simple trust that the Lord can do anything through him if the Lord so wills. Verse 13 says, So Joshua blessed him and gave him Hebron to Caleb the son of Jephunneh for an inheritance. Therefore Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite until this day, because he followed the Lord God of Israel fully. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba, for Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim. Then the land had rest from war. So Caleb goes up and fights these people in the next chapter while Judah is getting their inheritance, and he wages war and pushes them out of that land. And some other adventures happen. I'm not really going to delve into that, even though it's in Joshua, because it's repeated in Judges. And I think the story fits a little bit better there because it flows into something else that happens with his younger brother. And so, while it's a really cool story, and as you're reading through this, I encourage you to take special note of it. If we someday study Judges, I think it would be better to deal with it there, since the story sort of continues. While if we talked about it, we'd kind of be left hanging, as it were. So, through chapters 15 through 19, I'm not really going to say much other than Joshua and the leaders begin to divide up the land among Judah, among Naphtali, among all the different tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim and Benjamin, and they're listed each one by one as the land is divided between them, all the way through to chapter 19. And it says at the end of chapter 19, right at the last verse, so they finished dividing up the land. And so the in-between chapters, the ones we just kind of passed over, 15 through 19, are not unimportant in any way. These are going to be the land records for Israel for centuries. This is going to be how they know what belongs to who, and how the land is divided, and what families own what land. It's going to be extremely important. And it's even important for us because without these detailed lists of places and names and peoples and who got what and how far apart it was and all of that, we would have no real way to rebuild the past image and the maps and the places where they walked. So it's of extreme value, but if God's not listening, I'll say it's a little bit dry reading if we're just reading it. So I encourage you to read it. Don't skip it. But just realize it's mostly a list of names and places, which have great importance, but may not be fruitful for our study time together. So, chapters 20 and 21, I just want to mention a few things. There's 6 cities of refuge laid out. They choose 6. They choose Kadesh in Galilee, Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and Hebron in the hill country of Judah, all on the west side of the Jordan River. So 3 on the west, and then they choose 3 on the east side of the Jordan River. And they choose, well, it's over here. They choose Bezer in the wilderness of the land of Reuben, Ramoth and Gilead from the tribe of Gad, and Golan in Bashan from the tribe of Manasseh. So they choose these 6 cities of refuge. So anyone who commits a murder or kills someone accidentally can flee there and seek justice, and it'll be centers for justice and for community for the whole land. So they're evenly spaced. They're cities of importance, 3 on the west, 3 on the east. So everyone will have access to justice, everyone will have access to mercy, and to appeal the courts, as it were. So it's very important. It's going to be a central part of Israel as a nation, that they have things like laws, that they have things like just the structure that makes community and nations work. And so that begins to be set up. And then 48 cities for the Levites in chapter 21 are chosen, because the Levites don't get any of the land. Not really. Their possession is they get to be the priests of God. They get to serve in the tabernacle. They get to serve in the temple. They get to fulfill the worship offices and also the training offices to teach the word of God to the people. Because of that, God says, I am their inheritance. I'm their possession. They get to have a close walk with me doing my work, and therefore I'm not going to give them a territory in the land. Instead, I'm going to give them 48 cities and some surrounding countryside so they can graze their herds. But they get 48 cities scattered among Israel so that they can be among the people. They can be always present to teach, to encourage, to aid in the worship, and all the other things the Levites are going to do. But they don't get a direct inheritance among the people. This is to fulfill what God spoke about the inheritance, and it also fulfills what Jacob said to his children in Genesis 49 because of some of the crimes of Levi, his actual son, not the tribe. And so there was some prophecy there, along with Simeon. Simeon gets a portion of the land, but he gets it dead center in Judah's stuff. And over the centuries, Simeon, the tribe, will be swallowed up by the larger Judah tribe and will kind of cease to be a thing. Their descendants will still be there, the people will still be there, but they won't be much of a separate body. They'll just kind of be seen as part of Judah. And so there's some prophecies in Genesis 49 which have their fulfillment here in these chapters as the land is given out. So I'd encourage you to look at that. That's kind of a study for another time. A little bit more of a study of Genesis than Joshua, because this is more the fulfillment of stories and events which happened much further in the past. The last thing I want to look at together in our study this time is right at the end of chapter 21, verse 43 through verse 45. This is very important. It says, "So the Lord gave Israel all the land which he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and lived in it. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, according to all that he had sworn to their fathers, and no one of all their enemies stood before them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hand, not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass." So it's a conclusion statement to the giving out of the land, but it's much more than that. We see that God has held up his end of the covenant. He has fulfilled all of his promises. He has given Israel all the land, and they live in it, and they possess it, and they have rest and peace on every side. He has fought all their battles for them. He has provided for them through the wilderness. He's given them his laws and his testimonies. He's led them across the Jordan. And with Joshua as their leader, he has given them the land over these past several years. And now they have it, and they possess it, and they have peace on every side. Can you imagine? Can you put yourself in the shoes of Israel? They've gone from being a homeless group of slaves, freed from Egypt, wandering around in the hot desert. But because of God's ever patient hand and his great blessings and his mercy and all his great mighty wonders, he has led them from being a homeless band of slaves who do nothing but rebel, complain, and cause trouble, to being a settled, peaceful land that is a nation. They are a nation now. They're not just a wandering group of slaves. Now they're a nation, the nation of Israel. He has blessed them. He has settled them. He has given them and fulfilled all the promises he made. And that's important because there are many books without end and things talking about other books of the Bible, particularly Revelation and many others, that talk about Israel getting the land. Talk about Israel getting the land again. And it's really just simply not a true teaching. There's much of millennial thought is based upon it, but it's just simply not true, because this text very, very painfully clearly says God gave Israel all the promises. They were all fulfilled. The land was all given, the land was settled in, and they had peace on every side. This is not the only text that says so either, but since we're in Joshua, we should look at it. But God fulfills his promises to Israel. Israel gets the land. They possess the land. There's nothing left for them later to repossess. God will deal with that later. But we as Christians should not be looking to some future physical restorement to the nation of Israel as was realized in the days of Joshua. All those prophecies were fulfilled, is what Joshua chapter 21 says. That all was done. With that out of the way, what's the takeaway? What's the lesson from these middle chapters of the book? I think the lesson is simple, but it's so very profound. And it's so very difficult sometimes. Because God has fulfilled all his promises. He has blessed his people and he's settled them, and he's given them so many magnificent gifts and blessings. They've gone from being homeless wanderers without much to their name to being possessors of cities and lands and herds that they didn't even grow, and fruit trees they didn't have to plant, and they get to have all these things that the Lord has given them. They haven't had to suffer many defeats. God has fought the battles for them. The only defeats they've had has been when they rebelled and disobeyed. But for the most part, they have acted courageously, they have acted faithfully, and the Lord has defeated all their enemies. They have fought mighty long wars and battles to be true, but it's not been devastating to Israel to fight them. And so they've had complete success without great loss of life, and now they have all these blessings. So the big question is, what are they going to do next? What are they going to do with all these blessings that God has given them? Because sometimes the greatest tests, the greatest test of character, the greatest test of faithfulness comes when the challenges are over. The big obstacle facing you is gone, and you've received the blessing, but now what do you do with it? Do you get complacent? Do you fall away? Do you get idle and turn to other things? Do you forget the God who gave you all these things? It's so easy to get lost and to just start coasting, as it were. Just start kind of going with the flow now that you've got the blessings. When we should be always striving to climb that next hill, to achieve that next challenge, to grow into a deeper relationship with God, to trust Him even more. Because there will be more difficulties. We don't get to coast forever in life. If you've lived very long at all, you know that there may be times of tranquility, and we thank God for them. But new storms arise. And if you haven't been cultivating your faith in the intervening time, they can catch you unaware, and they can even blow you away. So what will Israel do? Because new storms will come, as we'll see near the end of the book. But for now, they have the land, they're living in peace, and they have been blessed mightily by God. So the takeaway for us is, if you've been blessed mightily, what are you going to do with the blessings you have? What are you going to do with the time that's given to you? Because in times of peace, as in times of conflict, we must stay faithful in both. Thank you for joining us in our study of Joshua. I look forward to closing out the study in the next couple of weeks with you. There's some great stories yet to see and more lessons to learn as we together study God's Word in the book of Joshua. See you then.